right. Well, welcome to the Frankincense podcast. I'm Bobby.
I'm Jared.
And Jared and I, we are here. And this is our first episode that's going to end up on YouTube. So if you're listening to this podcast, just know that you can go onto YouTube, look up the Frankincense podcast, and you'll be able to find us and you'll see our faces.
Yeah, you can see how much I smile, and you can see my my overdone theater teacher reactions to the things that Bobby says.
Yes. And you're going to also see that we have an extra face on the podcast. And I'm going to introduce him now because why not? My friend Markus Watson is joining us. He is the host of the Spiritual Life and Leadership podcast. And he is a great friend of mine from way back. He was a youth ministry high school director when I was exiting high school, kind of in the middle, in between of at Glenkirk Presbyterian Church. And so I'm excited to have him on with us. So Markus, thank you for joining us on the Frankincense podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad, excited to be here.
Great. Well, today we are jumping into, I think everybody's going to be expecting us to talk about this, the Capitol. What happened at the Capitol? The whole swarming of the Capitol building, the protest, the riot, I don't know, however you want to describe it, but basically the craziness that went down. And Markus had an awesome episode. If you want to go and listen to that episode, I'll have it in the show notes. But he did an awesome episode covering his thoughts on Trump, but also his thoughts on how the church should be responding. And that's really where we want to focus today. So yeah, let's just get at it, guys, because it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So let's go to the beginning. So we saw the at the Capitol, the Senate was meeting to process the electoral votes, and we saw a group of people who are followers of Trump, people who would support Trump, and they showed up to a rally of his, and then something happened. Something happened that basically turned into complete chaos that I don't think.
Oh, yeah. I guess I don't know the play-by-play of the day. I was driving home from work and I carpool with my next door neighbor, and he says, did you hear what's going on? And he sort of described it. And my first thought was, well, that makes sense. I mean, not that anybody saw exactly when this was coming or how this would come about, but I just heard that there were rioters at the Capitol, and it had to do with the Electoral College. And I was like, yeah, of course. I mean, this seemed like, predictable in some ways to me.
Right.
But I don't, but at that point I wasn't prepared for the magnitude of it. I came back and I started to look at like some live television later, and, it was just people crowded around, and actually someone had already gotten through a window and people were through that little crescent-shaped window on the Capitol building. I went, oh, this is a little different than I thought. I thought it was more like maybe people standing across the street like they were in like Philadelphia, chanting like "Stop the Steal," but it had gone way beyond that.
Yeah. I was in a meeting, and I had watched a little bit of the Senate, discussion or whatever. And then I had in a meeting, went into this meeting, and then my son texted me. He was at his grandma's house doing online school, and he's like, "Dad, are you watching this?" And I'm like, "Watching what?" He's like, "The news." And he goes, they're storming the Capitol building, and senators are hiding in their offices. I don't know if that was exactly accurate, but I was like, "What?" And I turned it on. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was, it was just crazy. Like out of one of those. What are those called? Olympus Has Fallen or something like that,
Yeah, it really did look like that moment in like a 90s like Enemy of the State, or something where Alec Baldwin is the president, something like that. It looked like a movie like that, and in a weird way, I felt like I was looking at a comic book. I mean, there were times in comic books when someone is storming the Capitol. I've seen like Amazon warriors take over the Capitol. In Superman, Lex Luthor was president for a while in Superman comics, and this sort of felt like that had come true a little bit, It was
Yeah.
weird.
I think what was crazy to me was, I mean, well, I think the whole thing was crazy, but the reality of it is that when you see people who are so crazed, right, so upset over the possibility of losing a vote, right? That was, I mean, losing an election,
Mhm.
like that was pretty much what this all came down to, feeling like something was
Okay,
stolen from
yeah.
them. But then when you see people kind of marching onto the Capitol, and I think this is when everything kind of came to a head with the idea of Christianity and politics overflowing together, right? Where
Mm.
people have taken, we've talked about the idea of Americanity before, Jared, the idea of like, we have taken Christianity
Mhm.
and made it into the complete American movement. And you see
Yeah,
the Jesus with Trump, and you see the cross
Yeah. And a noose or
and
a
something.
yeah, like
noose,
in
Yeah.
right,
or like in a swastika, right?
Yeah.
A
right.
Yeah.
swastika mixed up with the cross. It's like,
You had a Christian flag and Christian music blaring. Meanwhile, there are white supremacists, like different group
Yeah.
flags. There's like Q symbols everywhere.
right.
Hmm.
And so we have to say to ourselves, what do we need to be saying as a church, right? What does the church need to be doing? Because we
Right.
can say pray, we can say, well, we gotta, for some reason we decided to start fighting over stuff that we shouldn't really be fighting for, in my opinion. At least I don't see it in scripture anyway. I don't see Jesus saying you need to rise up and fight for my movement. In fact, he said the complete opposite. I believe he
Mhm.
told Peter that whoever lives by the sword is going to die by the sword, right? When Peter tried to
Yeah.
pull out his little fisherman's knife, and he cut off the ear of the guard, right? There's there's a lot there that for some reason we've
Mhm.
decided to push it aside in order,
Yeah.
and I'm saying we because the reality of it is we're getting lumped into it, right? Whether we want to be or not, we're being
Yeah.
lumped
Yeah.
into what
Yeah.
Christianity is, and this has become a tension. And so now, how do we try to reverse it, turn it, or how do we? What can we do? Is there any way? And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's really what I want to understand, and how and
Yeah.
discuss that today, because we see it, for lack of a better word, it feels like Trump has trumped Christianity, right? And
Yeah.
that's dangerous.
Yeah. I I was sharing with somebody recently. So I used to not call myself I would call myself Presbyterian, but I wouldn't necessarily promote that because, it sounds stuffy, it sounds old fashioned. And now I'm at a point where I'm like, I prefer to call myself Presbyterian because that doesn't necessarily assume evangelical. Like I used to say, I'm
Right.
evangelical, right? Evangelical. I haven't done this, but I imagine if you polled 100 people, if you said, "Who's the first person that comes to mind when you hear the word evangelical?" Many of them would say Donald Trump, not Jesus Christ, right?
Ah.
And
Mm,
right, I think the church has a lot of work to do to get healthy again. Yeah.
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 We've been it's as I refer to it, it feels like it's been hijacked, right? And that's
Hmm.
really what's happened.
Yeah.
We kind of go
Mhm.
to that, what was the movie where the pirates took over the ship and they say, "Look at me, I'm your captain now." Like, what's that? What was that movie?
I
Tom
don't
Hanks.
know.
But anyway,
I don't know.
anyway,
Oh,
that's
oh, I got you. Captain Philip. Is that it?
sure. It was
Oh
that
yeah,
movie.
yeah, yeah. Captain Phillips.
It's
Those modern pirates.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It
Yeah,
was
right.
the. I mean,
Captain Phillips, I think.
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a
You
very
thought what I
famous.
thought. I was like, oh, Treasure
Like
Island. No.
Pirates of the Caribbean.
It's a very famous meme now, guys. Come on.
Uh,
But
Mhm.
it's the idea though. It's like, I feel like at one point Jesus was the captain, right? I mean, Jesus is the captain. I'm gonna say he
yes.
is, right?
Yeah.
He hasn't lost that. But for some, at one point in time, he was the
Mhm.
captain. But now all of a sudden, Trump has said, "No, look at me. I'm your captain now." And
Mhm.
now you're
Mhm.
listening to what he has to say. And if it doesn't, if what is people in Jesus could say, don't hunger for this stuff. Hunger for righteousness. Quit hungering for power and and greed and hungering for place at the top and hungering for, like that's what we're hungering for some reason.
Mhm.
And he could say that and they would say you're wrong because Trump says we're supposed to be. this is who we're supposed to, and that is what
Mm.
has become so dangerous to me. And so now, hearing your words, Marcus, from your podcast, like the idea of how do we start praying for this, praying
Yeah.
for
Mhm.
a man who has created this kind of situation, this tension, because he has
Hmm.
created it with his words. But then
Yeah.
also praying for the health of the church. What, like, is there a way to be praying for this better? Is there a way that we could be leading this better? Is there a way to be talking about this better? And so that's, yeah. What are your thoughts?
Are you asking me specifically, or
Yeah,
I don't
I'm
want?
asking both of
Yeah.
you, but I'm kind of coming to you because of what
Okay. Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Good. Good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you might as
So,
well answer
oh,
because I'm coming up blank on this, so it's got to.
I mean, this is a hard question, right? So, so it's easier for me if I can just think about Donald Trump, the human being, first, right?
Okay.
This guy who at one time was a baby, right, and then a toddler, and then a fourth grader, and then a little middle schooler and a high schooler. Anyway, and then all that time was being formed spiritually, even though maybe we wouldn't call it spiritual formation. But Dallas Willard says everyone is being formed spiritually, right? It doesn't matter, even if it's not Christian formation. It's still a spiritual kind of formation, and then who you become is because of the way you have been formed. So he's had a spiritual formation, is a very an unspiritual, I think, probably spiritual formation.
Yeah.
A very materialistic kind of a spiritual formation. Again, I don't know him. I don't know exactly. I haven't read his niece's book or anything, but this is what I'm guessing, and a very self-serving kind of spiritual formation. So that doesn't take away his responsibility for his actions, but it can inform our understanding of who he is and why he does what he does. So here's what I was just kind of the gist of what I said in my podcast. I was I'll give you can I give you my little kind of the story of how I came up with what I was thinking?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
So
yes.
I was going for a walk, and I was listening to more news podcasts, and they were just kind of repeating all the same stuff I'd heard all week, and I got kind of sick of it. And I was just like, ugh, I need something different. So I put on this um, uh, podcast I enjoy called Pray As You Go, which is like a contemplative sort of a devotional 10 to 12-minute little reflection podcast. Anyway, and they're talking about the feeding of the 5,000. So I was reflecting on that and reflecting on people being hungry, right? And that God can use whatever little bit I have to feed people's hunger, certainly physical hunger, but I was thinking in terms of spiritual hunger, right? And so then after that finished, I continued to kind of walk in silence and think about things. And then I thought about Donald Trump, and I was like, man, this guy is so hungry, right? And you can just see how hungry he is. He's like desperate for approval. Um, he's constantly, right? It's like everything he does is to get him to look good, right? So
Mhm.
that I think people will say, wow, what a great person, right? Um, and so as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about the fact that I don't think that Donald Trump has ever really experienced love. I don't think he's ever given love, real love, unconditional, right? Freely given kind of love. And I don't think he's ever gotten it. I think everything has, I mean, he's so transactional, right? You give me this, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
Um, and hopefully I get more from you than I give to you. And that's not love, of course, right? Love is something that is freely given without any expectation of anything in return. That's what real love is. And I don't think he's ever experienced that. And so anyway, so that night I was thinking about that, and I mean, it's like my heart broke for him. Here's this guy who in that moment just was watching his entire reputation collapse. Not that in some people's opinion he had much of a reputation, I guess, but whatever he had, it was kind of, I mean, this whole thing that I wouldn't say he orchestrated it, but it was the result of his rhetoric. It completely backfired on him, right? I saw some news report, and I don't know, who knows if it's actually true, but that he was getting kind of excited as he saw people going into the Capitol building. Of course, that sounds very in character, right? I don't know what he expected, but it completely backfired, right? And so now he's been kicked off Twitter and other social media platforms. He's been completely gagged, by culture. He's been it's like Samson had his hair cut off, right? And now what? And so I'm sure, so I was just thinking about what is he feeling at that moment, right? And I was like, he's of course just raging, probably incredibly angry, but then also
Yeah.
probably feeling really rejected just by more and more of society. Twitter, like humiliated, because usually, like, he wants to dominate, he wants to overpower, right? You got to fight, and he doesn't have he can't control what Twitter does, right? They're a private company, and they can do business with. I mean, they can choose not to do business with someone who breaks a contract with them, which is essentially what happened, right? And he can't do anything about it. Now, he can probably sue them, and maybe, I don't know, but it'll be a while. He can't do anything immediately. So just humiliated by this feeling of powerlessness. And anyway, so I just, it's not that I felt bad for him. I felt bad for him not because of what had happened to him, but because of his entire life, right? Which led him to this place of loss and rejection and humiliation. And I mean, I felt mostly just bad for him, terrible for him, for never having really experienced love. I don't know if he ever will really experience love. I don't even know if he's capable of it at this point, because he has been so formed over the course of his 74 years or whatever it is. I think it's hard to change. God can do anything, right? And so, of course, I believe that that's possible, but I think it's harder if you get so locked in your way. In some ways, I would say, I think about C.S. Lewis, who says that I'm not saying Donald Trump is going to hell. I have no idea, but here's my point, right? C.S. Lewis says God doesn't. I'm paraphrasing here, something along the lines of, God doesn't send people to hell. People choose to go to hell, because and it starts now. Like, in some ways, I feel like Donald Trump is living a kind of hell on earth because he doesn't know what love is. Yeah. Anyway, there's some thoughts.
Yeah, it's a great place to start, and I have to admit, I like to think I'm able to empathize with people, but I never stopped to consider, like, it at this moment, the humanity of Donald Trump himself. I have in the past, and full disclosure, my wife and I were big fans of The Apprentice back in the day.
I
And,
love that show, man.
yeah,
That was a great show.
I remember just going to college and heading home and thinking, "Oh man, The Apprentice is on tonight. It's gonna be good. Gonna eat dinner and watch."
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there was something about him I did like and feel that he was funny, and sort of hardened my heart with him was just that first speech, man, after the descent on the golden escalator, talking, when Mexicans send their people, they're not sending.
Yeah.
Everybody knows the speech word for word by now, and that really just put a wall up between me and him, and it was just like, man, and but I do think that you're probably right in saying that he maybe not known love. It's not that people haven't loved him. I mean, it's obvious that his daughter loves him, his son loves him. I'm sure, but is he in the position, spiritually and emotionally to know what that's really like, or he just get sort of high when he's got people to sort of praise him? It kind of, in a weird way, you're making me think of him like Michael Scott from The Office, like he's just going around doing funny. He's just going around doing stuff and saying his things and doing his things, and he's being offensive and he's causing pain and then when there's backlash, he has no idea why. Like,
Right. Yeah.
what did I do? And
Right.
I actually think there was a certain amount of naivete on his part
Mhm.
on January 6th, because I think he really felt like the people who support me are like the good people, the real Americans. They're going to
Mhm.
show, they're going to show the integrity that I know
Mm.
have. And turns out that's actually not the folks that his rhetoric and his speeches have been encouraging and fostering along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And what's really interesting too, because when you start thinking about how he's feeling, these people who have been so connected to him, they're feeling the exact same way,
Mm.
right? They're feeling that exact same tension of, we are being defeated. We are losing. We are losing our place. We are losing our sense of freedom, because the reality of it is that he has empowered so many Americans to feel free to say these kind of things now, right?
Yeah.
And now they're losing the ability to speak like that. They're
Yeah.
because now he's going to be gone. Somebody else is going to be in the position now. If they speak like this and they're watching what happened to him on Twitter and in YouTube, and what was the other place that he lost to? Like there was some
Oh,
Facebook
I,
actually, yeah,
yeah,
Yeah.
Facebook, but I think even like Pinterest or something, like
yeah. He
I
lost.
heard someone, I heard someone
Oh,
joking about that the other day. Like you can't post any recipes for white power pancakes on Pinterest. No,
Yeah,
that was the joke
that's
somebody made,
awesome.
not my joke.
That's funny.
yeah. But the thing is, though, is like that's the fear holding, right? They're all saying now we aren't going to be able to speak the way that our president has spoken,
Mm.
and so now this is
Yeah,
why they're rising up. Like, wait a second, our
Uh-huh.
yeah,
power is being taken away, our place is being taken away. So now we have to realize that he's not the only one in this position,
Yeah.
because everybody who's been tied to his hip, they're all
right.
feeling this exact same feeling.
Mhm.
And
So
and
now,
that's
well, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that, I mean, that's why they need to quickly come up with this sort of counter narrative of like, no, the people that I believe in, the real Americans, the Donald Trump followers would never do this. This has to be Antifa. This has to be someone else, and that's really where, what motivates that story is like, no, it can't be us. It can't be me. It's got to be the enemy.
Right.
Well, if you know, Trump came on the White House Twitter, and he did a video, and he said pretty much that, like almost implying without necessarily saying it, that if you did this, you're not a part of my movement. If you did this, you're not
Mhm.
a part of us. And so it was already like it was like he was saying, well, look, we didn't, like, my people wouldn't do this, but there must have been an outside source. Now, my challenge to that whole thing, and I've refrained from challenging people on Facebook because I hate that, but
Mhm.
the reality of it is that if you're going to go ahead and start claiming Antifa would be willing to jump into this kind of thing, then you have to be willing to admit that during the Black Lives Matter protests, that most likely there were some
Mm.
MAGA people who jumped
Mhm.
in to make Black Lives Matter look bad.
Yeah.
And if you can't accept that, then
Yeah.
that's your inherent bias.
Yeah.
So
Right. I
so
think that's true.
you have to be willing to take all of it. If you're gonna make the claims on one side, you have to be willing to accept it on
Mhm.
yours. And if you're not willing to, then you have to be willing to wrestle with that too, because that
Yeah.
means that you're carrying a true bias that you aren't willing to let go of. And that's the tension that we're all living in right now.
Yeah.
Is what are we willing to accept about ourselves? Because there's some ugliness about ourselves that is coming up to the top, and how do we start to reconcile, and how do we start to resist, and how do we start to fight against those things within us, because
Mhm.
that's what's going to tear us apart in the end.
Yeah. You're so so your question originally, and is uh, I'm being brought back to it. Is what about the church and all that division? Because there's huge division in the country, but there's huge division in the church too. And yeah, so I'm trying to pull all my thoughts together here. right, there's definitely bias on both sides, and I think the bias has to do with a lack of trust in each other naturally, but also, right, a lack of willingness to, well, to admit our own faults, and to admit, or our side's faults, and an unwillingness to acknowledge what good there may be in the other side. Boy, now that's easy to say if I'm thinking about they should see the good on our side, so to speak. Not that I want to claim a side, but it's harder to say when I'm saying, oh boy, what good should I see in the other side? Ah, that gets hard now. Is there any? What do you guys think?
There's gotta be, but
oh, go ahead. Sorry, Jared.
I'm sorry. It's like there's gotta be, but it's so hard for me right now to not feel like there's just at its core this white nationalist like motivation to a lot of this. And it's hard for me to go, all right, what's the good side of a person who just wants to make America white again, or who just wants to at all costs restore some fictitious golden age of American Christianity.
Yeah.
You know, that's my I'm revealing very much like my anger towards the situation. What I'm attempting to do in saying that is not throw stones at the other side, but to say, but to think through that idea of like, well, what is the good there? What is the good to the other side, I guess. So,
and I think that the only way we can do that properly is to bring ourselves back to the creation, right? Because in James it speaks clearly of that, right? The reason why we don't speak negatively about other people is because we're speaking negatively about the very creation of God. We are not the creator, so we have no place to downplay, downtrod anybody who is not a part of that just because they're not on our side, just because they're not a part of us, because they're still created by God. And when we can look at the Imago Dei, right, the image of God that's placed within, and if we can continue to focus on that, then that's where that good is. Even if every other ounce just seems so evil or so vile or so gross, there's still the image of God that is placed inside of them. And that's that one good thing that we can focus on, but we have to bring ourselves to that. But that causes us to say that it's not about us, right? Remember, loving our neighbor means that we love them the way that we want to love ourselves. And so we want to love that image.
That's just it. You have really like said something that gives me life, it's the breath of God, it's to my soul, like what you just said, it's that person is a bearer of God's likeness. They were created in the image of God, image bearer,
Yeah. And, and really what we're wrestling with is what we always say that God did through Jesus, right? He loved a world that was totally against him. And he could have looked at the world and said, and went into a world, the Roman Empire, that is arguably worse than what we're living through right now, right? And yet he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Right? Are we able to say that about the folks who stormed the Capitol? And I want to acknowledge also, not every person who voted for Trump falls into the category of what we saw last Wednesday, right? I have wonderful friends and family members who voted for Trump because they are fiscal conservatives, and they were like, well, if I have to choose between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, I'll vote for Donald Trump. And same with Biden and Trump this time around, I think.
Yeah.
It really is a lesser of two evils, kind of for many people, kind of a choice. And now the other thing is, so I talked to someone on my podcast last fall, late summer, early fall, and he made an interesting comparison. He said that I'm trying to remember it exactly, but when people he had a tour of like a winery, and there was some really, really old wine, And of course, people say, like hundreds of years old. And, they say, I'm not a wine connoisseur by any means. I don't even like wine. But they say that, the older the wine is, right, the better it is or something. And so this guy giving the tour, who's like this super expert, he says, actually, if it gets too old, it's not really that good anymore. But people will still pay thousands of dollars for this rather not so great wine. But what's really interesting is that when they drink it, they still always talk about how great the wine is, right? Even though it actually doesn't taste as good as other wines. And so, right, and so and so because they have spent thousands of dollars on this wine, now they have to defend it, right? And so he was making the comparison for a lot of people who did vote for someone that maybe they had to hold their nose while voting for him. Now they have to defend that decision, right? And so they're kind of in this place. I mean, and so in a way, I think we need to extend some grace for those of us who, didn't vote that way. We need to extend some grace and say, hey, it's okay. We understand you voted that way, and almost give permission, as hard as it may be for people, right, to say, yeah, that wasn't. That didn't work out the way I was hoping it would.
Like grace to me, the opposite of polarizing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, though, is that we have to get to a place to where who should they be finding that safety in, right? That safe place to where they can acknowledge that. Because the reality of it is that right now, I don't think anybody feels safe.
Yeah.
Nobody feels safe to say that they voted for Biden. Nobody feels safe to say they voted for Trump. Because if you do, it's going to create a clash. And it was crazy to me, like, because that, and I think that's where the tension lies for that conversation in the grace aspect, is like, where do they find the grace? Shouldn't they find the grace within the church? Shouldn't the church find the grace within themselves to be able to say, all right, look, who you voted for is who you voted for. Yeah. Neither of them is going to send you to hell, no matter what somebody wants to tell you. Mm-hmm. They have no control over that. How you vote is not going to send you to hell, because honestly, both sides have great things inside of them that actually represent the kingdom. Mm-hmm. So it's not about that. It's where your heart is. Do you have a heart for Christ? Are you doing it because you really feel convicted that way? But are you willing to acknowledge the faults? Because and I think that's the problem, is that we aren't hearing a lot of people, I hate saying them because I don't want to create an us versus them thing. Right. But the reality of it is, though, is that we don't see a lot of people who may not have voted for Trump for his outlandish words and his thoughts around making America great again in that way. Mm-hmm. But they were fiscally conservative and saying, you know what, I want to protect my bank account. I want to protect my business. I want to protect this. And that's fair. Yeah. But then we need you to speak out against the rhetoric. We need you to be willing to say, look, I voted for him, but I voted for him because of these reasons. Yeah. And I cannot stand for racism.
I would have loved that. I would have really loved that and would have respected that. If, Christians got so fighting mad when anybody even breathed a hint of criticism towards Donald Trump. It's like, oh, this is it. You hate this president. You're grasping at straws. You just want to see him impeached. And it was never like, oh yeah, he should have never birtherism. That was dumb. But I really I really feel like he's the best hope for the stock market.
Yeah. Right. And that'd be awesome.
I always heard it's like it's a package deal. You gotta defend it all. It's like I don't want it to be a package deal. We need to hold him accountable for some of this other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
For Biden, you vote for Biden. Like, okay, why are you voting for Biden? Well, I voted for Biden, right? Somebody might say I voted for Biden because he's going to provide a way for immigration to be maybe taken care of, or mm-hmm. he might be providing medical care for people who need medical care. Mm-hmm. He might be providing finances for people who don't have a hand, that aren't able to make ends meet. Yeah. But I will acknowledge the fact that A, B, C, or D, right? Whatever flaws might be there. Like maybe in the past he has had some racist, thoughts around, and he has created some poor, imprisonment laws, and like his idea of justice, and it has been kind of backwards in the past. And I'll acknowledge that, own that. but say, you know what, like, but these are the A, B, and C are the reasons why I voted for him,
Yeah.
because I just didn't see that with this guy.
Yeah.
Own it. Be honest
Right.
about it.
Yeah.
But then speak out against the flaws. And that's really where the healing will begin, right? Because
I think so.
when relationships have something going wrong with them, if one side just says, I have nothing wrong, but this is what I see with you,
Yeah.
that relationship has nothing, there's no healing.
Yeah.
Right.
But when the relationship says, "Look, these are the things I'm doing right. I've cleaned the house. I wash the cars. I try to bring in a decent paycheck. I feed the animals. I make sure the kids live. Okay, cool. But I've also I know that I don't change diapers. I know that I don't tell the truth all the time. I know that you know,
Right.
all of a sudden it's like I'm acknowledging my brokenness.
Yeah.
And acknowledging your brokenness is how healing begins. And that's really
Absolutely.
that's what we have to see. Um, yeah, man. Okay, so this is good. See, Marcus. This is why I want to get you on here, because I thought this would be great. But
Yeah.
Marcus, so if I can,
Uh-huh.
because I got your email today about your
Oh, right.
podcast.
Uh-huh.
You shared that you've had mixed feelings about what you
Mhm.
shared in your podcast. And I know
Mixed
not every
reactions. Yeah.
mixed reactions.
Yeah.
So people who are listening to this now who have not heard Marcus's podcast, it's okay. But you know the thing is, because he didn't speak like the best about Trump, like like he didn't say like, oh man, like all rainbows and butterflies about him, but you did lift a prayer about him.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
so what what were the reactions, if I can ask you that?
Yeah, yeah. So the first email I got, and then I got a couple more after that, said, I don't think he's in pain right now. I don't think that's it. I think he's angry and he's furious and he's mean and this and that, but I don't think pain is what he's feeling. And so I emailed back and I said, I totally hear you. I don't think he's feeling it either. I think it's under everything that he's feeling is pain, and the pain of uh, low self worth, right? The pain of not having ever really experienced love and so forth. Anyway, so that was one of the responses. Another one was from folks who uh, voted for him, and some very who were supportive of him, and we're not happy. We're not happy about it at all. Um, and I'm actually thinking of some people that I know personally who listened to it, and we had some conversations about it, and uh, but the conversation was good, right? Which is why you need to be able to talk. So, but that was another response, and then I got a lot of responses, just that wow, you're right, we need to pray for him. One person said that she was in her car crying because she hadn't considered how unloved Donald Trump must feel, and we need to pray for the unloved. Um, so yeah, so kind of all across the board, and I'm glad. I think it's good because those who needed hopefully some encouragement got that, and some who needed some challenge maybe got that. And I kind of feel like I'm an Enneagram 9, a peacemaker, so I don't like to stir things up. And I had to do it for myself a little bit too, just to say what I needed to say, rather than just holding back and not saying anything. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I definitely appreciate what you said, and I appreciate what you brought to this table here. I know that we don't have all the answers. We're not going to have all the right answers. I think that when we turn to Scripture, we find the right answers. But at the same time, I think that um, there's healing. There's a possibility of healing, and one of the first steps in preparing for that healing to begin is really praying for the person who has either wronged you, the person who has created a tension in you, the person that, and right now in this moment, Donald Trump just might be it. And so pray for him. I
yeah,
mean, pray for, because you also said too, like if you love him, pray for him. And if you don't, pray for him, because we're called to do that. Like that's biblical. We are supposed to do
yep,
that. Um, But then we also have to get to a point too, again, of acknowledging our brokenness to pursue the healing that's necessary. But I want to go to James, just because James has a lot to say, I think, about where we're at. And I actually just
Mm.
preached on this on Sunday, but so not to go ahead and, like, shameless plug about my
I do
really
that all the
awesome.
time, right? It's fresh on your mind, and so you're making all these connections after your sermon. I get it.
Yeah, and it was, I'm not, it was just a really awesome sermon. Not just
Oh,
kidding. No, no,
yeah.
joking.
Good
But,
job. Good job.
I did a great lesson on Hamlet the other
yeah,
day. Putting
Oh,
that out
good.
there.
but
There
but
may be
when
a
you,
YouTube of it somewhere.
but when James in James 3, he's talking about taming the tongue, right, and what it means to tame our tongue. But in verse 9 of chapter 3, it says, with our tongue, right? He says it's a restless evil full of deadly poison. He says, with it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. But then he goes on in chapter 3 and he talks about that wisdom comes down from above, but is earthly. The wisdom that has caused us to be basically against righteousness, that causes jealousy and selfish ambition in our hearts, is not from above. It is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. It says, for where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder in every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace.
Hmm. Can you read that list
And when I
again at the
read
end?
those,
Oh, sorry. I want to.
oh,
I just. That was a great
no,
list. And
I
then,
know it's amazing, right? Because I
yeah,
read it, I was like, But it says,
yeah.
he says, for where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder in every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And actually, I think I put a unnecessary comma there, full of mercy and good fruits, like it's all
Hmm.
together, full of
Yeah,
mercy and
yeah,
good fruits,
yeah.
impartial and sincere. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace.
Hmm.
When James wrote those words, he was writing to the church, the
Yeah.
early church, the followers of Christ, trying to figure out how to
Mhm.
make things, how to figure out chaos. And he's saying, look, like, everything, this jealous ambition, the jealousy, the selfish ambition is all, it's not even, it's demonic. Like, you're saying that you're doing this in the name of Jesus, but it's all selfish ambition, and because you're jealous of something
Yeah.
and you want power, that is not righteousness.
Yep.
And that is actually demonic.
Yep.
Peacemaking, like seeking peace and sowing peace, is what comes from Christ.
Yeah.
And we need to be moving in that direction. And
Yeah.
so for Christians all across the nation, however you voted, it's time to put down the Biden Trump flag and say, I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of
Right.
Christ. I'm going to lean on what he teaches, because ultimately that should be what guides us all the way through. And that
Yeah.
should be our words, our actions. So storming a Capitol is not Christian.
Mm-mm.
It's not. Um, Calling people names on Facebook, it's not Christian. It's not.
Yeah.
Saying I can say what I want to say and you can't shut me down. No, that's not Christian either. Like,
Yeah.
because you should be saying things that people wouldn't want to block, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that, I don't know.
I mean, it's the complete opposite, right? It's laying down your life for your brother and sister, right? It's praying for those who persecute you. I mean, it's a complete opposite of everything that we've seen in certainly
Yeah.
last week. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, again, Marcus, thank you
Yeah.
for joining us.
Yeah.
Jared, as always, man, it's great to have you as a partner in this. And
Yeah, I
Marcus,
always learn something at this thing, Bobby. This was good. I came in here foolishly expecting not to learn something tonight, and I still did anyway. So.
That's awesome.
and that's why I brought Marcus on, because he's the scholar. I'll let him
Oh,
go ahead and share this. But Marcus, I mean, he has a real bookshelf right? I don't. I mean, that's how you know. That's how you know we got the
You
right
got your
guy.
book somewhere.
That's how you know we got the right guy when he has a real bookshelf behind him.
A real one, yeah.
But
Okay.
Marcus, hopefully
This
we can
thing's
have
going to
you.
be on YouTube, though. I feel like we've all got to decorate back there, a little bit better. Listen, wheels are already turning. I just want to say there are going to be lights. And if you have trouble with strobe lights, you might not want to watch.
Oh,
That would be awesome. That would be
that's
awesome.
awesome.
I'm sure people will love that. But Marcus,
Yes.
thank you again for
Yeah.
joining us. And Marcus, so Spiritual Life and Leadership is your podcast. But
Mhm.
how else can people find you so they can go on to social media? Tell us.
Yeah. So they can go to my website, markuswatson.com, and that's Markus with a K. Markus with a K. I don't know if I have reserved Markus with a C.com. Markus Watson. Anyway, that would be a good pointing. Anyway, Markus with a K, Watson.com. And then Twitter, Markus Watson. It's just at Markus Watson, again with a K. You can go to Instagram at Spiritual Life and Leadership with a little underscore between each of the words. Yeah. Anyway, but the website is probably the best place to go. Yeah.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
all that will be in the show notes too. So if you missed that while you're listening, don't worry, it'll be on the show notes, and you'll be able to read that. But Marcus, I appreciate you, man. I really do. I appreciate your desire to see people develop in leadership. I see I appreciate your passion for seeing the church be the church, and I really appreciate your willingness to come on today, especially with short notice. So I appreciate that big time, and in joining us in this conversation.
Yeah, well, this was great. I love it. And it's good to hang out with you again, Bobby, and good to meet you, Jared. And these are fun conversations. I love the conversations you guys have. And good, thoughtful, very frank, very sensible, and boom ching. Anyway, and
It was like a
good
delayed
humor.
catch for me. It was a delayed catch for me. I was like, wait a second, he just said
It was.
yeah.
If you go back and review the tapes, it was like a good 4 or 5 seconds before either of us were like,
Yeah.
what?
I know. I'm like, oh, they didn't get it. Anyway,
Hey, man,
thanks for having me. This
yeah,
was a lot of fun.
you can't blame me. I have a 4-month-old. I'm still trying to. I'm still in
Yeah.
dad brain, so I'm trying to get that.
Well, yeah, you're in combat mode still.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, hey, now I'm gonna go ahead and get it ready to sign us out here because we are recording this live on Zoom, but it's gonna be going on YouTube. But I'm gonna go ahead and just do the whole thing here. So, hey, you've been listening to the Frankincense podcast. If you enjoy what you're listening to, please share it, like it, rate it, give us a comment, let us know what's going on, and maybe if you want a topic that you want us to cover, share that with us too, because Jared and I would love to talk about that. But again, thanks for joining us on the Frankincense podcast. I'm Bobby.
I'm Jared.
And Marcus, thank you so much for joining us, and we will talk to you guys later. Bye.